Diplomatic summits had a particular smell. Recycled air mixed with the pheromone signatures of 17 different species, each trying to appear more civilized than their last genocidal war suggested. The Nexus station rotated slowly above the contested Kythera Nebula, its neutral status maintained by the simple fact that nobody wanted to clean up the mess if it exploded. Dr. Elena Marquias sat at the human delegation's laughably small table, watching the Corveth hegemony's representatives arrange themselves with the theatrical precision of a species that had conquered half the outer rim. Their delegation took up a full quarter of the amphitheater, crimson banners draped behind towering figures whose exoskeletons gleamed under the artificial lighting. The humans brought a translator, observed Zix Administrator Quellen, his mandibles clicking with amusement. The Trilaxian's comment carried across the chamber's acoustics like a poorly kept secret. Elena didn't bother looking up from her tablet. 23 years of xenolinguistic research had taught her that being underestimated was often more valuable than being respected. The galaxy's various civilizations had developed an amusing habit of treating humans like exceptionally clever pets. Dangerous enough to warrant caution, primitive enough to ignore during important conversations. Commander Vex Corvani stepped forward, his forearms spreading in the traditional hegemony gesture of martial dominance. 2 meters of chitinous armor and ceremonial scarring, he embodied everything the Corveth considered militarily superior. His reputation preceded him like a particularly unpleasant odor. 17 successful campaigns, 3 species absorbed into the hegemony, and a tactical mind that apparently viewed diplomacy as warfare conducted through vocabulary. "We gather to discuss territorial redistribution," Corvani announced, his primary vocal cords producing the standard diplomatic frequencies, while his secondary cords added harmonics that most species couldn't even detect. Though some participants seemed more suited to observation than negotiation. The barb was clearly aimed at humanity's modest presence. 3 delegates versus the hegemony's 37. Elena finally looked up, meeting Corvani's compound eyes with the sort of calm attention usually reserved for examining particularly fascinating specimens. "Territorial redistribution," she repeated, her accent giving the formal phrase an almost casual quality. Interesting euphemism for annexation protocols. A ripple of translator static filled the chamber as various devices struggled with the subtleties of interspecies sarcasm. Corvani's mandibles spread, the Corveth equivalent of a patronizing smile. "The translator speaks," he observed, though perhaps she should focus on accuracy rather than interpretation. That was when Corvani made his first mistake. Switching to battle cant, he addressed his aide in what he assumed was perfect. "Security, Jek nu Tavek Korvash, Mathek humans Detvash Kogalan Thresh." The phrase roughly translated to "ignore the monkey sounds." These humans barely qualify as sentient creatures. Battlecant wasn't just another language, it was the hegemony's most closely guarded military cipher, a linguistic weapon that combined tactical terminology with cultural concepts that supposedly couldn't exist outside Corveth neural architecture. Officers spent decades learning its subtleties. Most never achieved fluency. Elena tilted her head slightly, the way linguists do when they encounter something genuinely interesting. "Your subjunctive conjugation is off," she said, her voice carrying the same conversational tone she might use to point out a coffee stain. "It should be, Mathek humans Detvash Kogalan Threshek, if you're trying to indicate permanent categorical inferiority rather than temporary tactical disadvantage." The chamber fell silent with the particular quality of quiet that occurs when everyone suddenly realizes they've been watching the wrong show. Corvani's exoskeleton actually clicked, an involuntary stress response that betrayed his shock more effectively than any translation algorithm. "You ... He switched back to standard diplomatic frequencies, though his secondary harmonics had gone completely flat. How do you know Corveth battle cant? Know it? Elena's smile could have powered a small reactor. Commander, I've been correcting your tactical communications for the past 3 months. Your formation algorithms have 14 distinct vulnerabilities, most of which stem from linguistic shortcuts in your command structure. The silence deepened. Several delegates leaned forward, their various sensory organs focused entirely on the small human who had just casually announced that she'd been eavesdropping on the galaxy's most secure military frequency. Impossible. Corvani's voice carried new harmonics, frequencies associated with territorial challenge and imminent violence. Battle cant requires neural architecture that your species lacks, the conceptual frameworks alone. Oh, the conceptual frameworks are fascinating, Elena interrupted, pulling up a holographic display from her tablet. Especially the way you embed tactical hierarchy directly into verb structures. Though I have to say, your ancestors' decision to link strategic thinking with mating displays has created some rather amusing grammatical complications. The display showed a complex linguistic tree, branches spreading to illustrate the syntactic relationships between Corveth military terminology and social dominance patterns. Several alien delegates began taking notes with the frantic intensity of students who had just realized they'd been studying for the wrong exam. Corvani stared at the display, his compound eyes tracking connections that should have been invisible to non-Corveth minds. Where did you acquire this knowledge? Acquire? Elena's laugh held no humor whatsoever. Commander, your people have been broadcasting tactical updates in battle cant for the past 18 months, assuming nobody else in the galaxy was intelligent enough to decode them. We've been listening to every order, every strategic assessment, every casual comment about how primitive the rest of us are. She gestured to her tablet, where communication logs scrolled past in neat chronological order. Your confidence in linguistic security would be admirable if it weren't so catastrophically stupid. The hegemony delegation exchanged glances with the rapid, nervous precision of a species that had just discovered their classified communications had been turned into someone else's research project. Corvani's secondary vocal cords produced a low harmonic that Elena's cultural database identified as either profound embarrassment or pre-combat aggression. You claim to understand battle cant, he said, switching back to the military cipher with the desperate fluency of someone trying to regain lost ground. But comprehension and wisdom are different concepts. Jeknu korvash methek vash det kogalan, threshek valanis korvani jek thek vash. Elena's smile widened. The phrase was complex even by battle cant standards, layering tactical assessment with cultural superiority and ending with what amounted to a formal military challenge. Unfortunately for Corvani, it also contained 2 grammatical errors and a logical fallacy that undermined his entire point. Your confidence exceeds your competence, Commander, she replied in perfect battle cant, her pronunciation carrying harmonics that indicated not just fluency, but genuine cultural understanding. Also, you just accidentally declared yourself subordinate to your own aide, while simultaneously questioning your tactical legitimacy. I'd suggest reviewing verb hierarchies before attempting formal challenges. The translation was unnecessary. Every delegate in the chamber could hear the difference between Corvani's increasingly desperate attempts at linguistic dominance and Elena's casual, almost bored fluency. The human wasn't just speaking battle cant, she was speaking it better than the Corveth commander who had spent 40 years mastering it. Corvani's exoskeleton had developed a visible tremor. Around the chamber, representatives from 17 different civilizations sat in stunned silence, each presumably wondering what other impossible knowledge the humans had quietly acquired, while everyone else was busy underestimating them. Elena closed her tablet with a soft click, that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. "Now then," she said, returning to standard diplomatic frequencies with the casual ease of someone changing clothes. "Shall we discuss these territorial redistributions? I have some thoughts about your proposed annexation schedules that you might find illuminating." The emergency recess lasted exactly 14 minutes, long enough for panic to ferment into paranoia among the various delegations, but not quite long enough for anyone to figure out how badly they'd miscalculated human capabilities. Elena used the time productively, reviewing her notes while the chamber buzzed with frantic subspace communications. The Trilaxian delegation huddled around their quantum encryption devices, like nervous insects protecting larvae. The Vorthak Empire's representatives had activated privacy screens so thick they resembled metallic cocoons. Even the usually unflappable ethereal collective seemed to be reconsidering their assumptions about primitive bipedal mammals. Dr. Marquez. The voice belonged to Ambassador Thek Prima Valdris, whose species had perfected the art of looking concerned without possessing anything resembling facial expressions. The Keth were crystalline beings whose emotional states manifested as color variations across their translucent surfaces. Right now, Valdris displayed the deep amber hues associated with existential dread. Ambassador. Elena didn't look up from her tablet, though she noticed how other delegates gravitated toward their conversation with the desperation of people hoping someone else might have answers to questions they were afraid to ask. Your demonstration was illuminating. Valdris's chromatic patterns shifted toward cautious orange. Perhaps you could clarify the extent of human linguistic capabilities. The question hung in the recycled air like a diplomatic landmine. Around them, 17 different species pretended not to listen, while obviously recording every syllable. Elena finally raised her eyes, taking in the assembled representatives with the patient attention of a professor addressing particularly slow students. 3 years ago, your third battle fleet transmitted formation updates using what you believed was unbreakable Keth harmonic encryption, she said conversationally. Unfortunately for operational security, harmonic languages follow mathematical principles. Once you understand the underlying equations, decryption becomes a matter of computational power rather than cultural insight. Valdris's surface flickered through several colors Elena's database couldn't identify. That's theoretically possible, but the computational requirements are significant, Elena agreed. Fortunately, humans excel at building computers. We've been intercepting and translating Keth military communications for 18 months. Your tactical preferences are surprisingly predictable once you account for the way mathematical thinking influences strategic decision-making. The statement created a ripple effect of translation static as various species processed the implications. Elena watched the realization spread across the chamber like a slow-motion explosion. The humans hadn't just been monitoring one civilization's communications. They'd been systematically cracking everyone's codes. The hegemony's battle cant was merely the most recent addition to our linguistic archives, she continued, returning her attention to the tablet. Though I must admit, Corveth grammar made it one of the more challenging projects. Commander Corvani, who had remained ominously silent since the recess began, finally spoke. You claim systematic intelligence gathering against multiple civilizations. Such activities constitute acts of war under 17 different treaty frameworks. Only if performed by sovereign entities, Elena replied, without missing a beat. Earth's official position remains that we're too primitive for formal diplomatic recognition. Technically, we're just a pre-contact civilization that happens to be unusually good at listening. The legal loophole was so elegant it bordered on artistry. Every species in the galaxy had spent decades treating humans as barely sentient primitives, explicitly excluding them from treaties, accords, and recognition protocols. Now, those same classifications provided perfect diplomatic immunity for activities that would otherwise trigger interstellar incidents. Dr. Kes Navigator Yithran, representing the Hegemony's Intelligence Division, leaned forward with the predatory focus of someone who specialized in extracting information from reluctant sources. Detail the scope of your surveillance operations. Elena's smile suggested she'd been hoping someone would ask that question. The Vorthak Empire's military channels use triple encrypted quantum entanglement protocols, but they follow predictable rotation schedules based on lunar cycles from their homeworld. We've been reading their strategic assessments since the Kepler incident. The Trilaxian Confederacy employs biological encryption using modified pheromone sequences. Clever, but vulnerable once you map the underlying neurochemical pathways. The Ethereal Collective's psychic communications networks were actually the easiest to crack, since mental energy follows electromagnetic principles regardless of the species generating it. Each revelation hit the chamber like a separate detonation. Delegates from the mentioned civilizations displayed various species-specific indicators of shock, rage, and dawning horror. The Ethereals, who prided themselves on telepathic superiority, began emanating psychic static that made several other species develop immediate headaches. You're describing comprehensive intelligence penetration across the entire galactic community, Yithran observed, his tone suggesting professional admiration mixed with existential terror. We prefer academic research, Elena corrected. Human xenolinguistic programs require extensive datasets to function properly. Your civilizations have been remarkably generous in providing source material, though admittedly without explicit consent. The understatement of the millennium earned nervous laughter from several delegates, though whether they were amused or hysterical remained unclear. Corvani's exoskeleton had developed an audible harmonic resonance that suggested imminent structural failure. Dr. Marquez, he said, switching to battle cant with the desperation of someone hoping to regain some tactical advantage. Thek vash korvash me det jalan, vash korvani thek det me vash jek. The phrase contained multiple layers of military terminology, essentially demanding to know how deeply human intelligence had penetrated hegemony operational security. Unfortunately for Corvani, it also revealed more about current hegemony concerns than he probably intended. Your anxiety about the Proxima campaign is misplaced, Elena replied, her battle cant pronunciation carrying harmonics that suggested intimate familiarity with hegemony strategic thinking. The real weakness in your operational planning isn't tactical, it's logistical. Your supply chain algorithms assume enemy forces will respond to territorial incursions using conventional defensive patterns. When they don't, your entire advanced structure becomes vulnerable to asymmetric counterattacks. The chamber fell silent again, but this time the quality of quiet was different. Before, it had been the silence of surprise. Now it carried the particular weight that settles over groups of people who have just realized they've been playing an entirely different game than they thought. You've been analyzing our classified wargames, Corvani said, his voice stripped of all harmonics except those associated with defeat. Analyzing seems like such a formal term, Elena mused. We've been learning. It's what humans do. We observe, we adapt, we integrate new information into existing frameworks. Your civilizations have spent so much time establishing your superiority that you forgot to consider whether anyone might be paying attention. Ambassador Valdris's crystalline surface had shifted to deep violet, a color Elena's cultural database associated with paradigm shifts and fundamental recalibration of worldview. The implications are staggering. If humans possess comprehensive intelligence on all major galactic powers, then perhaps, Elena said, finally closing her tablet and giving the assembled delegates her full attention, It's time to discuss what humanity actually wants from these territorial redistribution negotiations. The phrase carried implications that reached far beyond simple diplomatic positioning. Every species in the chamber had assumed they were managing a collection of primitive but potentially useful beings. The revelation that those same beings had been systematically cataloging everyone's military secrets suggested a rather different power dynamic than anyone had anticipated. Corvani's compound eyes tracked across the chamber, presumably calculating odds that had suddenly become much more complicated. When he spoke, his battle cant carried frequencies Elena hadn't heard before, harmonics associated with strategic reassessment and grudging respect. "What do humans want?" he asked. Elena's answer would determine whether the galaxy's power structure would shift gradually or collapse entirely. Her smile suggested she'd been looking forward to that question for quite some time. Elena stood, her movement drawing every optical sensor, compound eye, and crystalline perception node in the chamber. The simple act of rising transformed her from observer to focal point, a shift in gravitational dynamics that seemed to bend the room's attention toward humanity's previously ignored corner. "What humans want," she said, activating a holographic projector that cast three-dimensional star charts across the chamber's central space, "is to prevent the systematic elimination of younger civilizations by established galactic powers." The projection displayed the contested sectors in brutal detail, not the sanitized territorial maps used in diplomatic presentations, but raw intelligence assessments showing fleet movements, resource extraction operations, and population displacement patterns. Every major power's expansion activities appeared in stark relief, their territorial redistribution revealed as precisely what Elena had called it: annexation protocols. High Administrator Nexthull of the Vorthak Empire shifted his bulk, creating mechanical grinding sounds that indicated either confusion or imminent violence. "These are classified strategic assessments. How did you—" 27 different surveillance networks, Nexthull," Elena interrupted, manipulating the projection to highlight Vorthak fleet positions along 3 separate expansion fronts. "Your empire broadcasts tactical updates on 14 separate frequencies, assuming nobody else possesses the computational resources to correlate the data streams. You've been planning synchronized invasions of 6 different systems, timed to coincide with this summit's inevitable failure." The hologram zoomed in on specific coordinates, showing Vorthak battle groups positioned exactly where Elena indicated. Several delegates began examining their own intelligence reports with newfound paranoia, presumably wondering what other impossible knowledge the humans might casually possess. Corvani's harmonics had shifted to frequencies Elena recognized from her linguistic analysis as pre-combat preparation, mixed with intellectual vertigo. "You're accusing multiple civilizations of conspiracy." "Not accusing," Elena corrected, expanding the display to encompass half the galaxy. "Documenting. This summit was never about territorial redistribution. It was about establishing legal justification for coordinated expansion. Each of your civilizations intended to use diplomatic failure as proof that peaceful coexistence with emerging species remains impossible." New data streams appeared across the projection, showing communication patterns between the major powers over the past 18 months. The web of coordination was elegant in its sophistication. No direct conspiracy, just parallel planning with convenient timing. Each civilization could claim independent decision-making while simultaneously benefiting from coordinated pressure on frontier worlds. Ambassador Valdris's surface flickered through rapid color transitions that Elena's database identified as cognitive processing overload. "Even if your accusations possess merit, human capabilities remain insufficient to prevent coordinated action by established galactic powers." "Insufficient?" Elena's laugh contained notes that made several species' translation systems emit warning indicators. "Valdris, Your Third Fleet's quantum cores will experience cascade failures in approximately 6 hours. The Trilaxian Confederacy's bio-encrypted communication network has been carrying modified viral packages for the past 3 weeks. Commander Corvani's tactical databases are currently hosting 17 different logic bombs that will activate if hegemony forces cross established border thresholds. The silence that followed Elena's statement possessed qualities that approached the theoretical limits of acoustic vacuum. She had just announced acts of cyber warfare that would normally trigger immediate military response, delivered with the casual tone someone might use to discuss lunch preferences. Dr. Yithrin's intelligence training finally overcame his shock enough to produce coherent speech. Those are acts of war. No, Elena replied, bringing up new displays showing Earth's official diplomatic status across 17 different galactic databases. Those are academic exercises conducted by a pre-contact civilization that technically doesn't exist in legal terms, according to your own recognition protocols. Earth cannot commit acts of war because Earth isn't officially capable of space travel according to galactic administrative records. The legal framework was so perfectly constructed, it approached performance art. Every major civilization had spent decades maintaining humanity's primitive status to avoid treaty obligations, recognition ceremonies, and formal diplomatic overhead. Those same classifications now provided comprehensive legal immunity for activities that would otherwise constitute grounds for obliteration. Corvani rose to his full height, his exoskeleton producing harmonics associated with territorial challenge and species-level threat assessment. Legal technicalities will not protect your species from retaliation. Retaliation? Elena queried, manipulating the holographic display to show real-time fleet positions across 18 different star systems. Commander, your forces are currently experiencing navigation system malfunctions, communication blackouts, and weapons platform failures that coincidentally began the moment you attempted to access Battlecant command protocols during this meeting. The projection displayed hegemony fleet status reports in excruciating detail. Ships running in circles as their navigation systems provided contradictory coordinates, battle groups receiving tactical orders in languages their computers couldn't process, weapons arrays cycling through diagnostic routines that reset every time they approached operational status. Your Empire's military effectiveness is currently hovering around 12% of normal operational capacity, Elena continued, her tone suggesting she was describing weather patterns rather than systematic military sabotage. The other civilizations are experiencing proportional difficulties with their respective offensive capabilities. The chamber erupted in overlapping communication attempts as delegates frantically contacted their military commands, confirming what Elena had already demonstrated. The humans hadn't just been monitoring galactic communications. They'd been systematically infiltrating every major military network, installing remote access protocols that could transform the galaxy's most powerful fleets into expensive collections of malfunctioning hardware. High Navigator Zesh Prime Octalan, whose species communicated through bioluminescent displays, began flashing patterns that Elena's linguistic algorithms identified as existential panic mixed with grudging professional admiration. You've disabled the combined military forces of 7 galactic civilizations. Disabled suggests permanence, Elena corrected. We've implemented temporary operational adjustments to prevent the systematic extermination campaigns you were planning to initiate following this summit's predetermined failure. Your forces will regain full functionality once written agreements guarantee the territorial sovereignty of all developing civilizations. The proposal was so elegantly constructed it bordered on extortion, except that extortion implied the victims possessed viable alternatives. Elena had systematically eliminated every military option while providing a diplomatic solution that allowed all parties to maintain official dignity. Corvini's battle count had degraded to basic stress indicators as he processed the comprehensive nature of humanity's strategic positioning. Your species has orchestrated the neutralization of galactic military supremacy. Orchestrated seems unnecessarily dramatic, Elena replied. We simply applied human curiosity to galactic communication networks and discovered that established civilizations possess an interesting tendency toward predictable behavior patterns. Your military doctrines, tactical preferences, and strategic assumptions follow mathematical principles that become exploitable once you understand the underlying equations. She gestured toward the holographic displays, where fleet movements across multiple civilizations created recognizable patterns that resembled nothing so much as mathematical formulas rendered in three-dimensional space. Each of your civilizations developed military strategies based on assumptions about enemy capabilities, response times, and technological limitations. Unfortunately for operational security, those assumptions were wrong. Those implications settled over the chamber like intellectual fallout. Every species present had built their expansion strategies around the premise that younger civilizations couldn't effectively resist coordinated pressure from established powers. The discovery that one of those supposedly primitive civilizations had been systematically cataloging their weaknesses while preparing countermeasures suggested a rather different strategic landscape than anyone had anticipated. Elena deactivated the holographic projector, returning the chamber to its normal lighting. The transition felt like emerging from a fever dream into stark reality, except that reality now included the uncomfortable knowledge that humanity had been conducting the galaxy's most successful intelligence operation, while everyone else had been busy underestimating them. So, she said, retaking her seat with the satisfied air of someone who had just finished a particularly engaging presentation, shall we discuss genuine territorial redistribution agreements that ensure the continued independence of developing civilizations? I believe you'll find our terms surprisingly reasonable, considering the circumstances. 6 months after the Nexus Station Summit, Professor Elena Marquez stood before a lecture hall filled with the galaxy's most dangerous students, 200 hand-picked military cadets from Earth's 17 different academies, each selected for their aptitude in xenolinguistic warfare. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was teaching battle cant to humans in the same week that former Commander Corvani had been demoted to cultural liaison and assigned to study comparative Earth dialects. The fundamental principle underlying tactical linguistics, she explained, manipulating a holographic display that showed grammatical structures superimposed over fleet formations, is that every language reveals the cognitive architecture of its speakers. Once you understand how a species thinks, predicting their strategic decisions becomes an exercise in applied psychology rather than military intelligence. Cadet Morrison, brilliant, arrogant, and possessing the particular kind of intellectual hunger that Elena recognized from her own graduate studies, raised her hand. Professor, how do we prevent other civilizations from applying the same analytical techniques to human languages? Elena's smile suggested the question demonstrated exactly the kind of thinking that would serve humanity well in the decades ahead. An excellent inquiry, Cadet. The short answer is that we don't prevent it, we make it irrelevant. She activated a new display showing linguistic evolution patterns across human populations over the past 6 months. Regional dialects had exploded into existence with unprecedented speed. Military terminology was being deliberately corrupted with civilian slang, and formal command structures now incorporated randomization algorithms that changed communication protocols daily. While our galactic neighbors scramble to decode what they think are stable human languages, we've been systematically fragmenting our communication patterns to prevent exactly the kind of comprehensive analysis we performed on their systems, Elena continued. Human linguistic adaptability is our greatest strategic asset, precisely because it makes us essentially unpredictable to species that evolved more rigid communication frameworks. The lecture hall's far wall displayed a live feed from the Corveth Academic Institute, where former military commander Vex Corvani sat hunched over a translation matrix, attempting to parse the grammatical implications of contemporary Earth urban slang. His academic supervisor, a linguistics professor whose compound eyes betrayed the particular exhaustion that comes from explaining the same concept repeatedly, watched with the patient despair of someone assigned an impossible task. Your predecessor's difficulty stems from assuming human languages follow logical patterns, Elena observed, noting how several cadets were recording Corvani's struggles for later analysis. Unfortunately for his research, human communication evolved to serve social cohesion rather than tactical efficiency. The result is a linguistic system that prioritizes adaptability over consistency, exactly the opposite of military cipher design. Cadet Chen, whose analytical skills had caught Elena's attention during the semester's first week, leaned forward with the focused intensity of someone pursuing a particularly fascinating problem. Are we developing countermeasures for species that might overcome their linguistic rigidity? Already implemented, Elena replied, bringing up classification schedules that showed humanity's current xenolinguistic research priorities. We're currently analyzing 14 different alien military languages, including 3 that their respective civilizations believe remain completely secure. The Vorthak Empire's newest encryption protocols will be compromised within the month, and the Trilaxian Confederacy's biological communication system has some interesting vulnerabilities that we're exploring. The display showed progress reports that would have triggered immediate security crises on any alien world, detailed structural analyses of supposedly unbreakable codes, predictive models of enemy tactical thinking, and comprehensive linguistic databases that covered everything from formal military communication to casual cultural expressions. The broader strategic implication, Elena continued, is that we've transformed galactic power dynamics from a competition based on technological superiority to one based on adaptive intelligence. Our advantage isn't that we're smarter than other species, it's that we're more flexible. She gestured toward another live feed, this one showing the current session of the Reformed Galactic Cooperation Council, where representatives from 17 different civilizations struggled to communicate using newly developed neutral languages designed to prevent human linguistic analysis. The results resembled a particularly awkward academic conference, where nobody could remember the correct terminology for basic concepts. Observe how our former adversaries have been forced to abandon the communication systems that supported their military effectiveness, Elena noted. The hegemony's battle cant has been replaced with simplified tactical codes that reduce command efficiency by approximately 30%. The ethereal collective's psychic networks now incorporate randomization elements that interfere with their natural telepathic abilities. Every major civilization has been forced to choose between communication security and operational effectiveness. The lesson was elegant in its simplicity. By mastering their enemies' languages, humans had forced those enemies to abandon the linguistic tools that made their civilizations function efficiently. The galaxy's former superpowers now communicated like tourists trying to navigate foreign countries, while humanity continued developing more sophisticated analytical capabilities. Cadet Singh raised her hand with the particular determination of someone who had identified a logical inconsistency. Professor, doesn't our linguistic analysis program assume other species will continue using predictable communication patterns? What happens when they develop truly random languages? Elena's expression suggested the question revealed exactly the kind of strategic thinking that had made humans so dangerous in the first place. An astute observation. However, truly random communication systems possess a fundamental weakness. They eliminate the efficiency advantages that language evolved to provide. Military organizations cannot function effectively using completely unpredictable communication methods. She brought up comparative analysis data showing military effectiveness ratings across different galactic civilizations before and after their linguistic security reforms. The results were uniformly catastrophic. Every species that had attempted to implement truly secure communication protocols had experienced significant degradation in combat coordination, strategic planning, and operational flexibility. The trap that our galactic neighbors have constructed for themselves is beautifully elegant, Elena observed. They can choose communication security or military effectiveness, but not both. Meanwhile, human linguistic adaptability allows us to maintain operational efficiency while remaining essentially unanalyzable to species with more rigid cognitive architectures. The holographic displays shifted to show current galactic territorial arrangements, where humanity's official primitive status continued to provide diplomatic immunity, while human influence expanded through what the Reformed Council euphemistically termed academic exchange programs. Every major civilization now hosted human linguistic researchers, ostensibly to promote cultural understanding, but actually to provide continued intelligence-gathering opportunities. Elena deactivated the displays and faced her students directly. Your generation will inherit a galaxy where linguistic supremacy determines strategic advantage. The civilizations that once dismissed humanity as primitive now send their brightest scholars to study Earth languages, hoping to understand how we achieved comprehensive intelligence superiority through nothing more sophisticated than careful listening. Through the lecture hall's transparent walls, the lights of orbital research stations were visible against the star field. Installations where alien academics worked frantically to decode human communication patterns, while human researchers continued expanding their analysis of galactic linguistic systems. The irony was perfect in its symmetry. The species that had once refused to acknowledge human intelligence now competed desperately for the opportunity to understand it. The ultimate lesson of the Nexus Station incident, Elena concluded, is that underestimation remains the galaxy's most persistent tactical error. Our enemies assumed linguistic superiority indicated intellectual dominance when it actually revealed cognitive inflexibility. They created the conditions for their own strategic defeat by refusing to consider that someone might be listening carefully enough to turn their greatest strength into their most exploitable weakness. As the cadets filed out to begin their advanced xenolinguistic training, Elena noticed a priority message waiting on her personal communication device. The sender was listed as Academic Supervisor Corvani, and the subject line read, "Urgent consultation regarding human pronoun declensions." She smiled, remembering a conversation from 6 months ago, where a certain hegemony commander had dismissed humans as barely qualifying for sentience. Now that same individual was pleading for help understanding the grammatical complexities of a language he had once considered primitive. The galaxy had learned, perhaps too late, that the most dangerous enemies are often those who appear least threatening, especially when they've been quietly listening to every word you say and taking notes on your mistakes. Elena archived the message without reading it and began preparing her next lecture on advanced tactical phonetics. After all, there were still 11 alien languages on her research schedule, and the semester was just beginning.